In this lesson, we're going to be taking a look at the cardiovascular system. The main job of the cardiovascular system is going to be transportation, and it's going to be involved in transporting a lot of different molecules and substances within the blood, and it will be delivering those substances to all of the different organs and cells that we do have. Now, when we start talking about what the cardiovascular system is actually composed of, you can see in this image right here that right in the center we are going to have the heart, and then we're going to have a lot of other tubes essentially that are connecting to that. So we have different veins and arteries, and of course the different vessels that we're connecting, they do come in a lot of different sizes. Now, if we talk about the heart a little bit, the heart is going to be located right here in the center of the chest. This is going to be within the mediastinum. And the heart is going to be enclosed within the lungs. So the lungs kind of wrap around the heart. If you look at the image here, if we look at it from the top view, we can see that the heart is going to be shifted towards the left side a little bit, so more over towards the left lung. If we look at it in another view, right here, we can see that we do have the lungs on either side of the heart. And then we can also see that the heart is basically resting right on top of the diaphragm. So the diaphragm is a structure that we see just on the bottom of the heart. The heart is going to be covered by a double-walled sac called the pericardium. If you look at the blown up image right here, we can see the pericardium, and it has a couple different layers to it. The fibrous pericardium would be what we find on the outermost portion of the heart, and this is going to serve a protective role. And then in addition to that, it's going to help anchor the heart so that it maintains the right location. Underneath that, we're going to have the parietal layer of serous pericardium, and this is going to attach to large arteries that happen to be leaving the heart. Now, just underneath the pericardium, we're going to find the myocardium. The myocardium is going to contain the cardiac muscle, and that's the portion of the heart that is going to be contracting and helping with that pumping action that the heart is known for. The heart itself, if we were to look at its structure, it is going to contain 4 hollow chambers inside of it, and those hollow chambers are called atria or ventricles. And if we look at them here, we can see we have a right atrium and a left atrium, and we have a right ventricle and a left ventricle. Well, the atria, so atria is plural for atrium, which would be the singular. Their job is going to be to act as receiving chambers. So this is where the blood is going to be coming into the heart. And then if we're talking about the ventricles will be the discharging chambers. So this is going to be where the blood is actually leaving the heart, and it's going to be the contractions of the ventricles that will actually propel the blood out of the heart. Besides the chambers, we do have a number of different arteries and veins that are associated with the heart. So if we talk a little bit about the pulmonary circulation of the heart, we have the right pulmonary veins and the left pulmonary veins. And what these are going to be responsible for doing is they are delivering oxygen-rich blood to the left side of the heart. We also have the superior vena cava and the inferior vena cava. Their job is going to be to receive oxygen-poor blood from the veins of the body. So they're bringing that oxygen-poor blood in. And then we have the right pulmonary artery and the left pulmonary artery, and their job is going to be to carry the blood to the lungs to pick up oxygen and then also to unload carbon dioxide, which is something that we would want to ultimately get rid of. So all of these are going to be involved in this process that we call pulmonary circulation. If you look at the image right here, it is showing that circuit that's going to take place. Basically, we're going to have blood that goes from the heart to the lungs so that when it gets to the lungs, it can pick up oxygen and it can get rid of carbon dioxide. And then we're going to bring that blood that is now oxygenated, we're going to bring it back to the heart, and then we can send it out to all the various tissues and cells of the body. The left side of the heart, its main job is systemic circulation. So as systemic circulation, its job is going to be to bring oxygen-rich blood into and then back out of the heart. And when that oxygen-rich blood leaves the heart, it's going to get delivered to the various cells and tissues that we have. The right side of the heart is the pulmonary pump. Its job is going to be to bring in oxygen-poor blood and then send it to the lungs so that they can actually get it can get reoxygenated so that it can go back and deliver that oxygen back to the tissues. So it is going to take both of these kind of working together with each other. If you haven't guessed it yet, one of the main roles of the circulatory system or cardiovascular system is going to be to take oxygen to the various cells that we do have. So here's just another look at the heart. So really looking at a cross section. And what this image is showing is that the left ventricle is actually quite large. It's much larger than the right ventricle happens to be. And that's because the left ventricle is going to be sending the blood out to the various tissues and cells of our body, and the right ventricle is really just sending the blood from the heart to the lungs. And that's a very short distance when we're going from the heart to the lungs. So because the left ventricle has to send the blood so much further, it is going to be larger, and we are going to see more cardiac muscle there. The heart also has some valves, and the job of the valves is to allow the blood to only flow in one direction through the heart chambers. And when we say one direction, this is from the atria through the ventricles and then out of the heart through the great arteries. So atria to ventricles to the great arteries. And so there's different types of valves that'll be involved in this. The first ones are what we call the AV valves, and we call them the AV valves because these are valves that are found between the atria and then also the ventricles. And their job is to prevent backflow. So if we have the atria sending the blood to the ventricles, we don't want it to kind of go back into the atria again. It's supposed to keep moving forward. And that's what these valves are going to do. It really requires the coordinated contraction of the atria and the ventricles to ensure that the valves work properly. The semilunar valves, these are going to be the valves that guard the bases of the two large arteries leaving the ventricle chambers. And their job is to prevent arterial blood from re-entering the heart. So again, the valve's job in general is to ensure that we just have one-way flow with our blood, again, from the atria to the ventricles and then to the great arteries. It's very important that the heart has the necessary amount of oxygen all of the time. So to ensure that the heart remains oxygenated and nourished, this is going to be accomplished by the right and left coronary arteries. So they are devoted specifically to oxygenation of the heart. And if we don't have enough oxygen in the heart, then this can cause quite a problem. If the heart is deprived of oxygen, this can cause angina pectoris. This is crushing chest pain. So besides the fact that this is painful and uncomfortable, this is something that can also lead to a heart attack. And as we know, heart attacks can be very serious and they can actually be deadly as well. Now each day the heart is going to pump 6 quarts of blood around the body about 1,000 times. So pretty amazing that our heart is going to pump 6 quarts of blood 1,000 times every single day. But this is exactly what our heart does. And to do that, the muscle cells, the cardiac muscles, they're going to contract involuntarily in a regular and continuous manner. Now, it's really important that they do contract involuntarily. This means that this is something that is going to happen without us even thinking about it. We don't have to control that pumping action. And there's going to be 2 systems that regulate the heart activity. We have the autonomic nervous system and then also the intrinsic conduction system. And so these 2 together are going to make sure that the cardiac muscles continue to contract involuntarily pretty much all the time. We do have a pacemaker, kind of a built-in pacemaker inside of our hearts. This is going to start each beat, and because it's starting each beat of our heart, it is ultimately setting the pace. You may have known people before that this sinoatrial node, that is really the formal name for our pacemaker, if that is not functioning correctly, then many times people do have an artificial pacemaker implanted in their heart. So this little pacemaker that we have, it is going to set the rhythm of the heart. It causes muscle depolarization in one direction only, which means from the atria to the ventricles. There are a number of heart abnormalities that are associated with the beating process. And on this slide, we're just seeing 3 of these. Fibrillation is when there's a very rapid, uncoordinated shuddering of the heart muscle. Tachycardia is a very rapid heart rate, and then bradycardia is going to be a slow heart rate. If we talk about the actual beating process, the cardiac cycle refers to the events that are needed to complete one heartbeat. This is going to involve two things. We have a contraction, which we refer to as systole, and we have a relaxation, which is referred to as diastole. And so if you look at the steps that are involved right here, the first thing that happens is that the blood is going to flow passively into the heart. And when the blood flows passively into the heart, it's going to enter the atria. The atria are going to contract, and when they contract or they squeeze, that is going to force the blood into the ventricles. Step 2 is going to be that the ventricular contraction is going to begin, and as the ventricles actually contract, this is going to push the blood out. And so the blood is going to exit the ventricles, and step 3 is going to be that the ventricles relax, and as they relax, they begin to fill up again. So that is really what is taking place when we do talk about one heartbeat. That one heartbeat is really alternating contractions between the atria and then the ventricle, and then atria and ventricle, and so on. And that's going to continue that repeated heartbeat that we do have. Cardiac output is going to be the actual amount of blood that's pumped out by each side of the heart in 1 minute. This is based on heart rate. It's also based on stroke volume, so how much blood is actually pumped at a time. Here we can see a number of different things that do affect the cardiac output. This is affected by crisis stressors, so physical stress, emotional stress, things like exercise, body temperature. Our blood pressure certainly affects this, and there's a number of things that can affect our blood pressure. We can have some effects from just blood volume decreases if we do have a hemorrhage or a leaking happening someplace. There are hormones involved. So notice that there are a lot of different things that go into actually controlling the cardiac output, so the heart rate and then also the stroke volume. The blood vessels are going to be a very important part of the cardiovascular system. They are working together with the heart, and they are going to form a closed transport system known as the vascular system. Another way to look at it is that this is a series of tubes that are going to encase and really allow the blood to move through them. There is a very specific order that the blood is going to move around the body. When it leaves the heart, it is going to be through the large arteries. So the blood will leave through those arteries, and then those arteries are going to deliver the blood to smaller arteries. And then it will be delivered to arterioles, and then eventually to capillary beds. Now, the capillary beds are going to be what is directly associated with the various tissues that are going to be receiving the oxygen from the blood. When the blood is going to leave the tissues, it's then going to go back into the capillary beds, which will deliver that blood to the venules, then to the veins, and then ultimately to the great veins, which are going to return it to the heart. So on here, you could certainly look at this as a cycle because that is the way that it's going. It would be the heart really located right here in the middle of all of it. So here's a closer look at the arteries, the capillary bed, and then the vein. The arteries are going to be taking blood from the heart, and in the arteries, you do have on the very inside what's called the tunica intima. This is this layer around the inside. Its job is to decrease the friction, and if we decrease the friction, that's going to help with the overall flow of blood. The tunica media, this is going to allow the vessels to constrict or to dilate. And then we also have the tunica externa, which is going to be for support. It's also going to be for protection of these different arteries and veins. Notice right in the middle of the arteries and veins, we do have the capillary beds. Again, the real action as far as delivering things to the tissues and then picking things up from the tissues is really going to take place in the capillary beds. If we look at the arteries and the arteries, their job again is delivering blood to the tissues. They're going to be closer to the pumping action of the heart. They tend to experience higher pressures, And because they're experiencing higher pressures, we do tend to have thicker walls around our arteries. So thicker walls, they're also going to have a heavier tunica media. On the vein side of it, they function further from the pumping action of the heart. Because of this, they tend to experience lower pressures. And because they're experiencing lower pressures, they have thinner walls and thinner tunica media. So this image here is just showing us the difference between the pressure that we experience in the arteries. You can see that the closer they are to the heart, the higher the pressure, and then the further away we get from the heart, we have a lower pressure. So the lowest pressure would be in those veins that are very close right there to the heart. When we look at the blood vessels do have some skeletal muscles that are working right there in conjunction with them. The skeletal muscles, they are going to contract, and when they do that, they enhance the ability of the veins to return the blood back to the heart. So it's really going to be the action of both that's helping to get the blood back to the heart. The capillaries are going to be very tiny, and these have transparent walls that are only one cell layer thick. Those transparent, very thin walls are going to really help with the exit of oxygen and then the entry of carbon dioxide into and out of the capillaries. The capillaries themselves are going to form a network called a bed. Now, right down the middle of the capillary bed, we have kind of this one directed capillary, and we call that the vascular shunt. So that's kind of running through the middle, that's connecting the veins and the arteries. And then off of that, we're going to have a lot of smaller little branches, and that will be where we have the actual delivery to all of the different tissues and cells. In this image right here, we're having a look at the arteries inside of our body. When we look at pictures of the cardiovascular system, typically the arteries are going to be shown in red, and the reason for that is because they have the oxygenated blood inside of them. So this blood has high oxygen content because this is blood that is leaving the heart, which now needs to deliver the oxygen to the various tissues. The largest artery that we do have is the aorta, and in this picture right here, we can see the aorta right here on top of the heart. The veins are typically shown in blue, which is what we're seeing here. The veins are going to be carrying oxygen poor blood, and really they're returning that blood back to the heart. All of the veins are draining into the vena cava, which is going to be right here in the center. Okay, so we can see that large vein in the center, which is carrying that poor oxygen blood back to the heart. If we talk a little bit about supplying blood to the brain, it's very important that the brain has the necessary amount of oxygen all of the time. We said that delivering things, carrying oxygen is the job of the cardiovascular system. So there are going to be some arteries whose specific job is to deliver that and supply the brain. This is going to be two different arteries. We have the internal carotid arteries and then also the vertebral arteries. If we look at this picture of the brain, you can see that we do have a number of arteries that are really running throughout the brain. Now, with this, we do have some arteries that branch off of the internal carotid arteries, and that's the middle cerebral artery and the anterior cerebral artery. And then we also have some that specifically branch off of the vertebral arteries. And this is going to be the posterior cerebral artery and then also the basilar artery.